Africa is used to taking permissions from Europe. And here you have Europe having their lunchbox almost taken from them by the USA. And we still have fear and look towards Europe for African solutions, ladies and gentlemen. What does that even say about the potency of Europe at this point and the self-esteem of African leaders, if I may ask? America wants Greenland. Denmark says no. Now, Denmark, NATO, and the USA have to sit, whether they like it or not, and negotiate. I thought no meant no, ladies and gentlemen. Europe, for your information, is on its last feet, if you didn't know. Europe is literally dying. France, the UK, and Germany may have been looking strong to us all this time, but America just got them exposed. Russia actually exposed them first, ladies and gentlemen. America just exposed them by making demands and threatening them with tariffs and all they could do is negotiate, ladies and gentlemen. Now, they are forced to make an offer to Trump to cool him off from taking the entire Greenland as one of America's states. Is this the Europe Africa is worried about, ladies and gentlemen? Is this the same France that Francophone African countries are still worried about, ladies and gentlemen? The same France who needs America to protect them from Russia is the same France these African countries are so scared of. That's deciding the fate of so many African countries. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't make any sense to me at all at this point. It amazes me how we are struggling to break away from the shackles of these people, especially for these Francophone countries in Africa. France and Europe cannot even protect themselves, ladies and gentlemen. Europe alone cannot protect itself, ladies and gentlemen. Do you watch the faces sometimes? Do you watch the faces of European leaders when Trump tells them in their face, America protects Europe, and America built Europe, and America spends more on Europe than Europeans spend on Europe? Do you watch their faces? And those are all facts, ladies and gentlemen. And then even at one point last year, the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who is the chief of NATO and the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, called Trump daddy, ladies and gentlemen. Daddy.
They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easier to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word. He did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children?
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No?
He
did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Yep. Whether it was casual or was a joke, he did call him daddy, signifying the strength the U.S. exerts over Europe and the need Europe has for the USA. Now, since all these I'm saying are fact, what does it imply for Africa's sovereignty and our unity? What is holding our AU back? What is holding it back from taking stance on how we want to operate moving forward? Ladies and gentlemen, if you observe carefully all that's happening in Africa in terms of our dependence on European banks and economies and aids, when you fully come to realize and acknowledge how much Africa's perception is towards Europe, you discover that the problem with Africa's economic stagnation isn't really about the European countries' decision or roadblocks put on Africans. It's really not, but purely an African leadership crisis, ladies and gentlemen. There is absolutely nothing any European country is doing to keep us where we are. I used to believe that for a while, and now I'm no more. I don't. Every challenge we have in Africa is as a result of our bad decisions as individual countries and as a result of our collective decisions as African Union. Europe has more than enough problems on its hands to handle right now. They are totally overwhelmed with threats from Russia, from China, and illegal immigration right now. They are simply aren't in any shape or form standing in our way to prosperity. And even if they were, ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing stopping us from doing what we have to do to break ourselves free at this point. This is the 21st century, for your information. Everything is possible. It is our leadership and choices that has been the cause of all our troubles. Burkina Faso and the AES made a decision, and so far they aren't dead. They are still there. In the face of all the threats and attacks, they've prevailed. Imagine when other blocks of African countries begin to rise and set up systems to foster trade cooperations, education, banking, and others amongst ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. Just imagine how that could turn around the fortunes of this continent within a decade, ladies and gentlemen. This would immediately make us a force to reckon with. The only thing standing in our way, for your information, as a matter of fact, is the people who lead us. You know it, I know it. It has never changed. The political systems we have are so messed up. By the time you get through to the top, you are completely corrupted. I mean, think about it. How does anything new happen under leadership like Paul Biya, for instance, like Museveni and co, who still live in the 70s, who have been in power since Adam and yet see no need for replacement? How does new things happen under them? Many African presidents are simply myopic in their ideas or too corrupt to see beyond their nose or clueless as to what to use the power they have for, or just holding the position for some paymasters, ladies and gentlemen. How does transformation come about when every effort is invested in winning the next election, when there is a country to run, when all your effort is to win the next election? Meanwhile, you have a country to run. Who does this if not for a madman? Europe is dying and everything shows, but we as a people aren't taking any real advantage of it. China, by way of national policy, is inserting itself into every space possible for a takeover. Everywhere Europe was significant in the past, China is inserting itself there right now, especially in Africa. China is the one benefiting in all of this, ladies and gentlemen, which goes to show, even if Europe falls completely today, it wouldn't automatically make Africa great. We have to take it if we have to get it. We have to take it if we want it. We have to step into places of relevance and leave all these entertainment stuff behind for a while. Manufacturing in Europe is falling. China is expanding. Agriculture in Europe is becoming more expensive. China is expanding. NATO army is being exposed. In this Ukrainian war with Russia, NATO army is being exposed. China is rising. For every demise of Europe, China gains. Where are we in all these equations, ladies and gentlemen? If China could produce athletes, I promise you, if China could produce athletes, I bet you, they would have dominated Europe completely. They would have made African athletes a non-entity. Just when Europe is on the downside, sliding, going down, and looking weak in Africa, China is quickly gaining momentum on this same continent. As it stands now, right now, currently, ladies and gentlemen, there is no country in Africa where China isn't dominating in terms of manufactured goods. It begins with manufactured goods, and then they become your development partners, and then they overwhelm you with their loans and aids, and before you know it, they hold a stake in the leadership of that country. This is what is happening. That has been their strategy in Africa. It is one colonial master after the other. When do we snap out, ladies and gentlemen? There is not a single African country that's called the production hub of Africa. Not one. All of us will have to go all the way far away to the Far East to get supplies. We are constantly sending our money, our raw materials to them. This has never proven to work, and this will never make us great. China is only going to replace Europe in Africa at the end of it all. This is a wasted opportunity we are seeing. The time is now, ladies and gentlemen, for Africa to get into nationalistic mindsets. we need to approach development on the lines of ownership. We need to own thriving mining companies as states. We need to own thriving state farms and processing lines, ladies and gentlemen. We need to operate state construction companies that's going to build our roads and railways and every facility necessary for development. It must be led by state for the people across board in Africa, ladies and gentlemen. The government of Africa must be competitive in the marketplace moving forward. We cannot afford to leave the market to the private operators only. That's how the West wants it. But that's what's allowing for every foreign organization to come here in Africa and dominate us on our own soil. Moving forward, it cannot work like this. The state must get involved. There must be new policies on what can come in and what can't, ladies and gentlemen. We must protect our local industries at all costs. We must make it possible for them, our local industries, to thrive no matter the cheaper alternatives out there. If we don't act now, whilst Europe is wobbling for solution to its own problems, we may never have this opportunity again. Europe isn't the future, for your information. America isn't the next big thing. China isn't the savior. And Russia, for your information, is far from being anywhere near to the hope of Africa. Africa is, I said, Africa is the next big thing. Take it from me. I'm Cyrus, and thanks for watching.